Before submitting a form, we should always validate the data and make sure it's in the right shape. For example, if you have required fields, we want to make sure they're filled out. If you have email addresses, we want to make sure these are valid emails, not just random characters or numbers. If you have number fields, we want to make sure they are within a valid range. For example, we cannot have a negative value for a price or an age, right? Similarly, if you have date fields, we want to make sure these are valid dates. So before submitting a form, we should always validate the data. Otherwise, we open ourselves to data corruption and security attacks. One of the techniques a lot of hackers use is they provide invalid values and then see if they can break anything. For example, they can enter a negative value for age, or for the first name field, they can enter a really long string with thousands of characters. So we should always validate the data to prevent security attacks and data corruption. Now, HTML5 elements come with built-in validation, so we can perform a lot of basic checks, but for anything more complex, we have to use JavaScript. Now, unfortunately, that's outside the scope of this course, but let's see how we can use the built-in validation in HTML5 elements. So I'm going to add an input of type text, and here we can apply the required attribute to make this field required. Now, required is a Boolean attribute, so we don't have to give it a value. Now, let's add a button for submitting the form. I'm going to call it submit, and here we should set the type to submit. All right. Now, look what happens if I try to submit the form without filling out this field. We get this error saying, please fill out this field. This is the basic validation that comes with HTML5 elements. Now, can we change this error message? Well, we can, but to do that, we need to use JavaScript. So once again, that's outside the scope of the course. Now, we have a few more attributes here. We have min length. We can set it to 3. And now the user has to enter at least 3 characters. So if I type a single character and then try to submit the form, I get a different error saying, please lengthen this text to 3 characters or more. Similarly, we have another attribute, max length. We can set it to 10. So now the user can only enter a string between 3 to 10 characters. I would say as a best practice, you should always use max length. Otherwise, a malicious user can enter a really long string with thousands of characters and they can break your website. So these are examples of validations for basic text fields. Now, if you have an email field, we set the type to email, and now the user has to enter a valid email address. So if I type just some random characters, I get an error saying, please include an @ in the email address. Now, similarly, if we use a date field, the user has to enter a valid date or they will get an error. Now, for numbers, we have 2 other attributes. So instead of min length and max length, we have min and max. So if we set the max to, let's say 5, now the user has to enter a value between 0 and 5. Again, as a best practice, always validate number fields, especially if you don't allow negative values, because negative values can easily cause data corruption. We don't want that, right? So this is all about data validation. Next, we're going to talk about submitting the form.